Hello, and welcome to Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud. Together, we'll explore ways to support teacher growth, elevate your coaching practice, and boost student success. Each week, I'll share my own insights, as well as conversations with inspiring guests to help you lead with confidence. Thanks for listening. Building the culture we want and the one that student success requires. I'm delighted to have two highly experienced school leaders who are recognized leadership coaches joining the podcast. Drs. Ben Johnson and Bobby Dodd. As I read through their bios, these words describing their focus and commitment jumped out to me as keys for leadership: culture, learning, trust, collaboration, and reflection. Their just released book, Intentional Influence: Harnessing Cultural Mapping to Build Commitment, supports leaders at all levels who have experienced creating a vision and a plan and then only run into a stall, that place where resistance creeps in and momentum fades. It's that spot where authority is insufficient and influence is necessary. I'm looking forward to the insights that they will share. It's a special opportunity for me to have Ben on as a guest, as I consulted with him for a number of years in his role as assistant superintendent for secondary schools in Bismarck, North Dakota. Welcome, Bobby and Ben.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I'm excited about it. So I'd like to begin looking at two terms from the title of your book, so that we can be listening with understanding. And the first term that I wondered if you might address is the word influence. Would you flesh that out for us?
Yeah, Steve, I think that oftentimes people look in organizations, whether they're school organizations, nonprofits, or even businesses, about seeing that Christmas tree hierarchy, that's what authority means, that you have influence others. We would urge that really influence is shaped by the professional networks of relational connections that are based upon true trust and the intersection of that daily work. And sometimes that means that people who don't have those titles are the colleagues that have the most credibility among their peers and those that they work the closest with. So we believe that influence flows through your spheres of influence, not the chain of command.
I think that's interesting, not only looking at it at the higher leadership levels, but I frequently find teachers who don't understand the quote influence that other teachers have, and they think there's something going on behind the scenes that they're being left out of. But the influence comes from the way the person has worked within the system and the relationships and connections they've built.
Yeah, that connection is currency. It's like we have currency with one another because we've spent time and energy with one another. We know that we can trust our colleague. We've been through things, or I see them. And so I'm more likely to be influenced by those spheres of influence that are tightly connected. And that's really what our cultural mapping brings, that I think is different, is really trying to be intentional about looking at where that hidden, invisible culture is emerging because of those relationships, because of those connections of the peers that are close to one another, and then how you can harness that to multiply your impact or sustain what we call like leadership cascades.
So I'm going to ask then if you talk a little bit about cultural mapping. You've described it as a diagnostic tool and a strategic framework, and I have to make a admission here. Until Ben talked to me about the book, I was unfamiliar with the term cultural mapping.
That's probably a good thing, because we kind of made up a new term, although maybe someone else uses it for a different way. So really we talk about that this relational connections, who's connected to who influences who's closer to one another. And then we really focus on commitment levels, either commitment to the vision and the direction of a culture, or really, I think with much of your audience too, is also the ability to scale initiatives. And so who's on board with Maybe it's project-based learning, maybe it's standards-based approach or scaling PLC. Who buys into that direction and who has capacity and understanding? So who's on board, and then how are they connected with one another? And so it's really trying to make that invisible different pieces of information. I kind of look at it like a mosaic, right? Each little tile, but you start putting it together, and we actually are mapping and drawing it on a whiteboard or a piece of paper and color coding and creating there. You start to see this picture that emerges, and you can start to see where information and influence is flowing. I'd bring Bobby in to see from his end how he'd define it too.
I like how you're saying it, because it's Ben and I always talk about. It's like creating a systemic culture of influence. It's not something you see in leadership. It's something sometimes, especially when we coach. You'll approach leaders and they feel like they're in a spot where they don't know what to do. And really, when you start grounding yourself in relationships using this system, you can see progress. So I think it lets you see influencers visually, as Ben was talking about that mosaic. Whether it's on a napkin, on a board, there's a starting point in it, and then you use that starting point and able to affect others positively along with that influence.
Can I say you're laying out consciously something that historically only got dealt with unconsciously?
I think it was accidental versus purposeful, or you might see parts of the system versus truly mapping the whole system. Gets me to realize, for example, that one individual might be best friends in a different department or a different grade level. You might have spouses that are working in a school system, or thinking about an accounting firm or a marketing firm. You might have two people that were roommates, 10, 20 years ago, or worked at a former company together. So we know these little bits of information. And what Bobby and I have also found too is sometimes leaders, what we're talking about, no matter what the organization, sometimes don't know as much as they really need to know personally and professionally about the people that they're entrusted to lead. So part of our framework and process is then trying to be intentional and realize where you have gaps of information, and then try to fill that in so that you can start to see that influence. So as I was, alluding to before, and Bobby talked about when we go and coach people, is start having people put what they know about individuals, and all of a sudden they realize, well, that person, what do you know about this? Well, they like to go, mountain biking on the weekend. And then you're talking later on, and it's like, oh, well, that person mountain bikes. And I paused and I had a leadership team. I'm like, do they know that they both mountain bike? And they just all kind of looked around like, I don't know. I'm like, that would be a good thing to try to connect them with over. And then they did, right? And so then the next time I came back and they talked about that synergy that these two people, they kind of, oh, hey, do you know that Billy mountain bikes?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we should. And it's like all of a sudden, I was told, and I forget where it comes from, so I'll just make up the stat like other things, right? As if 90% of people will stay at the job if they like their boss and they have a friend at work. So I think part of that in this day and era in all job shortage, but especially in school, is retention is the new recruitment, right? So we have to be able to create those conditions where people feel like they belong and that they're part of something with significant and purpose. And we see that in all generations, but I think especially in some of our younger generations, is they want to have meaningful work, not just a paycheck too. So I think it behooves the leaders to come in and say, where are my people? Do I really know my people? And how can I harness those connections and build connections where they don't exist, where there might be gaps?
Yeah, it's funny, Steve, it's like, it's one of those things as a leader, people say, well, do you really know your team? Do you really know your staff? And then you sit back and say, oh, yeah, I do. And what Ben and I have found out is you really don't. And so sitting down and being purposeful is important in these purposeful meetings, as we'll talk about, and those type of questions and those connections, like Ben was talking about people's interests. Once you really get to know, that's when the mapping can really be fully effective for you and your organization.
I'll tell you what's jumping out as I listen to both of you is because I've worked on this a lot with teachers around the issue that your students need to be known, and they need to know that they're known. So you knowing, but the kid not knowing that you know is insufficient. And I'm just carrying that same thought through to leadership. The members of your staff need to be known, and they need to know that you know.
And Steve, to that point, at some point, where do you stop and where do you focus? We believe that this can be scaled to not only thinking about teachers or other adult lenses, but this could be very applicable to fine arts or athletic organizations, right? When you think about teams,
Sure.
and then also I believe in the classroom, looks a little bit different, but especially maybe even in elementary or middle school teams, like where you have kids for multiple times throughout the day, organized. I think teachers can use this lens too of who gets it, who's on board with where we're headed as a classroom and as maybe a team or an organization as well. So love you adding that lens as well.
I think of modeling, right? And you were talking about, Steve, like we always want teachers to get to know our students, and as leaders, we need to get to know the people on our team. We need to model that for others, right? So if I'm going to have meetings with teachers and ask them questions, and not just teachers, anybody on my staff, and get to know them more and get to really deep down see what makes them great, what's their points where they would like to add input, their opinions. We want our teachers or anybody on our teams, as Ben was saying, any organization, we want to model that for them, so then they go and do the same thing. And I think that's important about the cultural mapping, is it starts with us as leaders, as we say throughout the book, and then that sphere of influence just carries on.
Well, you kind of jumped us into the next question that I had, and that was that you describe leading starting with yourself, that you just touched on there, Bobby, starting with yourself, and then with others, then with teams, and then with organizations. And I'm wondering if you'd kind of walk us through that structure or approach.
So we kind of say that there's 3 levels within that. You got to lead yourself in order to lead others. And in that, when it becomes beyond individual one-on-one leading others, it's really about leading small-scale teams. And then teams are comprised as you spider web that out into the entire organization. So same with cultural mapping. But if you don't know what your core values are as a leader, how do you know what you're trying to lead people towards? If you haven't been clear on whether it's professional learning communities, some of our schools are embracing, project-based learning or standards-based, reporting, grading, feedback, whatever initiative, but also just what do we believe about kids? What do we believe about how we want to interact and create that learning environment? Being crystal clear on that first and foremost is important, because once you have that, that can be a lightning rod, I guess, so to speak, that can really start to create that cascade and those ripple effects throughout. And so then, as Bobby is talking, and he can speak some more about that, we get into having one-on-one meetings that sometimes are formal and sometimes informal, but I would stress that you need both, where you're really trying to learn who are your people and build capacity, and also get those feedback loops to get to know them and figure out who you can connect and build their capacity, because you're trying to create that clarity in the mapping process that can also add empowerment that allows you to really start scaling that commitment throughout the organization. And subcultures, I think, are really impactful. So much of an organization's life and breath is really what's happening in those subcultures. If it's a grade level team, or at a large high school, it might really just be the science department, right? That's how people's identity is more so. Or middle school, it's a team. Same in other organizations. And then as a leader, as you're being intentional about, am I building capacity in all these, do I have someone in each of those groups or multiple people that we're trying to build that capacity? All of a sudden, now where's the intersection between pockets of excellence to is it becoming systemic? And then that's part of where that cultural cascades comes from. And last I'd say with this is really, my daughter, we write a few different stories, and some of them are parts of Bobby and parts of me and parts of maybe a few others. But my daughter was obsessed with wolves, my youngest, and we went to Yellowstone one time, and I just sat there and I was watching this movie about how the wolves changed rivers, is what it was kind of entitled. And in there, they just really talk about the Yellowstone. And I know there's different perspectives on the wolves, but reintroducing a keystone species was very a great metaphor for us to look at how systemic leadership coming back, which is to this point, is reintroducing that systemic leadership. The wolf was just the wolf. it just did the wolf behaviors, and as a pack, it got organized and worked together, and that started changing the behavior of other animals that then eventually affected like the regrowth of trees and willow trees and bushes and berries, and all of a sudden birds are coming back, and beavers now can be those subculture and create ecosystems within, and it's just natural order. And so we feel that there a lot of times there's a lack of organizational leadership, or leaders are hired to come and fix something. And we just need people to be really clear on who you are, because then you can start to align others towards that and allow them to be the best version of themselves within that organization. Again, we say the best version. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you don't need to change or sand some edges. But as you do that, now you're going to be intentional how you can create those cascades within those teams, those subcultures, and then throughout those ripple effects throughout the organization. And again, that impact is able to be seen when you have a map and you know where you should be intentional about investing your time and energy.
Bobby, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, Ben, he hit the nail on the head. He talks about, first of all, I think he has a whole other book on wolves, if you ever want to get in that. he is really knowledgeable in that area, but it's great. It's great. And he explained it to me and it made complete sense. But we start talking about those meetings that are purposeful, and sometimes they're informal, and it's great, because what happens is you get to know a little bit more about people. You ask specific questions, and then it takes that informality and changes it to that they know you care about them. Right. And then that, as I said earlier, that caring creates that relationship, and then it spreads and it cascades all throughout the organization. But, going back to your original question, it starts with us. It starts with the leaders, because that's who everyone is looking towards. Everyone is looking towards us. And once we can get that cascade going, that ripple effect going, as Ben said, down into our teams, or, down to our captains, or down to our department heads, everyone has to see that happen, and it has to start with us, whether it's formal or informal. All those conversations make a heck of a difference. I know Joe Sanfilippo always talks about really all you need is about 30 seconds. You can make a huge difference with somebody in just 30 seconds of time. And so I always remember that when it comes to those meetings, whether you're scheduling that meeting or if it's just passing someone in the hall.
I would just add to that, what I think we just want to be really clear is there's that through line. It's personal clarity, and your relational credibility leads to team cohesion that allows you to have organizational momentum. And again, that's by leading oneself, leading others, intentionally getting to know them, and now intentionally building up teams that allow for a systemic and productive culture.
You've got me caught up in my reading and study a long time back, and working with Margaret Wheatley's work. So the whole ecosystem piece has just always made total sense to me, that the whole top down organizational model just doesn't fit in to what you see actually happening within the organization. Might look good on a nice piece of paper or a report that goes out, but it's not the real piece. I'm wondering if you might both share an example, either from your own leadership work with your teams, or maybe a coaching example of working with cultural mapping, and kind of what you implemented and what you saw happen.
So back to when I was a building leader, we had a situation, and this was, I'm so grateful for Ben, because sitting with him and talking with him and being able for him to share things with me, it enlightened me, and I was able to take it back and use it immediately, even before the book even started. So I remember a time when we were looking at our building. We thought we had a great building. We thought we had a lot of great things going on, which we did, but then we also had some feedback in there, some negativity, and we just couldn't wrap our heads around it. So we would have staff members sharing things, whether they were through surveys, whether they threw it out in the community. Very similar in the book. We talk about the opening story with Ron. That's a real life story. That really happened. And so what we started doing, we were sitting around, we were like, how can we get the best out of our best people? Because sometimes we get burdened down with the resistors, and we get caught up in the disengaged, and we wanted to really focus on our committed and how are we going to get the best out of them. And so literally it was, I talked with Ben and I started reading some things, and I said, well, let's figure out who the best of the best are. I mean, let's write them on the board. And so we were having a private meeting, we had a whiteboard, and we started jotting the names down. And then, that led us to, okay, let's maybe create some 15-minute meetings, meet with not just them, but the entire staff, and be purposeful with our questions and figure out, okay, how was summer vacation, getting to know people, but then also having a question of, hey, tell me, we've been hearing some feedback about maybe staff's opinions not being heard. Can you share a little bit about that? And what you're able to do is figure out a little bit more about people, about the relationships. And if you're documenting those things down and taking them back to your team, it enabled us to create that map. And so what we were able to do was connect with people who had, as Ben said earlier, had similar interests, but then also find people who, well, right now they seem to be a little bit, they feel like they're on an island. I said, well, let's get them connected. And so what we started doing was purposeful grouping at different events, different meetings. We were asking the committed to assist us as well. I mean, I have a story that's not shared in the book, but it's something that, think of, you could work at an organization where staff members go to a happy hour every Friday or on the weekend, or they get together. If you know some of those committed people, when you have a conversation with them and say, hey, when you're with Jerry today, ask him his thoughts on this idea that he gave to me and that you gave to me, and you said you worked with him. And so that literally happened. They came to me, and just like in the book, there was a story about somebody for years hearing no about their ideas. One time they came and I said, hey, let's do it. Go see what his thoughts are, because you could partner with him and do it. Well, sure enough, this happened outside the organizational setting, and they were able to connect, and it started a ripple effect of transferring maybe some negative energy that existed there. And it got one person starting to see positive. And as Ben will always tell you, like, just because somebody's a resistor, they can change. You can make that change. And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I saw it happen right before my eyes as people starting to change a little bit. And maybe for years, they weren't there, but as we say in the book, at some point, people had that light in their eyes. People had that enthusiasm. That's why they got into education, or that's why they started working for an organization. It's there. Sometimes we just lose our way. As Jimmy Cassis talks about, you just lose your way sometimes. And it's on us as leaders to try to help get that back. And so with the mapping, I was able to see it. And then I would tell Ben about it. And he's like, yeah, that's it. You're doing it. And so just that story there, I mean, it changed. I tell people it's the most valuable thing that ever happened in my career. And like, well, what? Just meeting with people? Like, yeah, exactly. Because I thought I knew people, but in reality, I really didn't. And once I did, they saw that. And then things just started kind of a spiral effect in the building. Was then the teachers see that, the students see that, and it can create a more solid and profound culture. And that's the beauty of culture mapping.
Thanks, Bob. Ben, you have one?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Bobby hit on so many great elements that, that truth telling of like where it's actually, it moves from like theory to like you actually do it, and it can be a very practical, work. And I think we outline the steps in the book, but again, it just simply, this is really, becomes a process that has evolved and comes from my just kind of how do you see that behind the picture and how do you make it visual? Like you need a roadmap. And if I have a roadmap, I can know how to try to navigate. And in my work as leadership, it's leading people and it's navigating, the political winds within schools or really trying to bring people back in the fold, as Bobby talked about, that had maybe lost their way a little bit. So we always talk about not labeling people, but rather like how do you categorize people? And I think that's an intentional distinction, because some people might say, well, what do you feel about like labeling someone as a resistor? What I would say is I'm categorizing them there based upon the evidence that I see. Yeah. But if I'm presented with different evidence or they start to move, and again, this isn't to judge or, ostracize someone, but it's rather to be like, where do I need to put my time and energy because I'm only one person and I need to multiply that effect throughout the organization. So I need to know who has influence, social and formal influence, and how do I invest and build capacity in them. So I've done this throughout, and it's obviously evolved throughout my time in leadership. I've done things like this sometimes with initiatives, and sometimes just like, where are we going and who's kind of on board with this new direction as we're headed. And I've seen that be beneficial to many colleagues. And a coaching example that I'd say real quick is coaching with an individual, and we plotted it out, and he's having some real struggles with not feeling like clear communication was going on. And we mapped out his building leadership team, and it was at an elementary. And so K-5, and he had 7 then building leadership members, and 5 of them were resistors. And there came some transfers, a couple of retirements, and some crucial conversations. And the next year, a life of breath, fresh air, because now people are actually carrying the banner, carrying forth that information, and helping there be clear communication where it maybe wasn't happening because you didn't have people that were aligned there. Again, it's not just to surround yourself with positive, but you need to work with the willing. And then I think that's intentional that they need partners as well to pair up. And that's part of the cultural mapping. So I'm always looking, who's that next, wingman or woman that can be join forces where people can get some capacity together to create that, energy and synergy within the organizations.
So guys, I want to float a thought that's in my head now past you, and feel free to tell me I've totally blown this off. But the more I'm listening to you've mapped out a process to assist people in doing what we know needs to be done. I mean, it's like all of your examples. It's almost common sense, but it's not being done. The time to reflect and figure out how to do it isn't being dedicated to it. And I sense that what you've done is laid out for people how to do it. I mean, I'm having trouble finding anybody that would argue against your points.
I think that point resonates with me as some of leaders that I've talked with. They're like, "Hey, I think I kind of do this." It's like, well, you now do it intentionally and systematically because I've worked it through you. So now you do it and we revisit it. But you didn't see the forest through the trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
You saw these all these are isolated, and that's the point of where we're trying to say, like, mapping. And it was a great discussion with one team with principal and APs, and they were kind of like arguing back and forth as to where one individual might be based upon their own personal experiences. And again, that's where I'm like, it's not about labeling and getting it right. It's just, what are the look fors? And we outline some of that you can use to kind of say, this is where I think the person is. Great. Where are they now? And then what are you going to do to try to help influence them either directly or through their peers to move it forward? But again, people, it's like pay now and play later, or play now and pay later. Yeah. And if you don't take some of that time, I'm so busy, but you need to have a blueprint. My grandpa was a general contractor. You need to know what you're going to be doing. So you do things in order and you have an understanding of the direction we're headed and the steps along the way. And if you have no map, you're just going to be wandering through that. Yeah. And I think that's where then frustration creeps in and people can throw their hands up in the air. Bobby's talked about that with other people too. It's like they just don't know what to do next. And again, just simply mapping it. Now you can start to see, this is where I am, current reality. Where do I want to move it? Where's the opportunity for growth and intentional work?
As I was reading through your work, what kept coming to mind is the leadership people I'm working with who can complain about the problem, describing what's happening now, but there's no plan to change it. If I wait till next year, maybe I'll have a different team.
Yeah, Steve, you bring up a great point. It's, Ben and I talk about this, especially when we coach people. It's, leadership it's always moving very fast. And I think in this day and age, a lot of leaders, in whatever organization it is, there's a tendency to get overwhelmed. And, that term is very popular now. And so when you get overwhelmed, it gets to a point kind of like, one of our characters in the book, it was like, I got a decision I have to make. I'm either going to take this path or I'm going to take this path. And when it comes to the mapping, very purposeful. And so what that does is it allows that overwhelmness to maybe come away a little bit. So when Ben and I are, when we coach, it's like, no, hold on a second, let's slow down and let's start figuring some things out instead of that initial reaction of, I don't know what to do, and I can't, this person's always going to be that way. Well, you need to figure out what makes the person, who are they? And then maybe you can, if you do all that, if you go through the mapping, Ben and I always talked about this, you go through this and try this, and things still don't change, I'd be completely shocked, first of all. But if then things don't change, then then you have a person. But also in the book, we talk about, what do we do if you end up having a resistor like that? But that's rare, because when you put time in, you invest in people, it's tough for them not to see that and then have at least a slight change, and to embrace the culture that everyone's trying to create in your organization.
So a lot of the listeners to this podcast are instructional coaches or administrators who are supporting and working with instructional coaches. And I'm wondering if you make, what are your thoughts connecting to cultural mapping as a way of building out a culture of coaching within a school?
I'd say that I think from the instructional side, there's perhaps multiple lenses that you could look at it, but this provides you with a leadership lens to see, is it true resistance, or is it a lack of skill, or is it like will, right? And then you need to be able to uncover that and have conversations, but you can peel the layers back and understand, like, what's the history, like what's going on? Have they been burned before? Or have they just lost their way? Do we need to connect them with others that can help them feel more confident in the skill set? So I think oftentimes too is like a coach can come in and do it only so much. So that's part of the intentionality of mapping, because you're looking for that peer influence, that second grade teacher who can be influenced by a colleague down the hall or across the way, right? Who might be able to help them and show them and understand from their perspective a little bit more. So I think that resistance, what are they fearful of? And if we can try to unearth that, then it allows us maybe through conversation, a clarity, common ground, being able to figure out how to go forward. I also think that it can be used when someone is at a point in time, I won't versus I don't know how. We need to make sure that we contain that resistance so that doesn't drag down or be cancerous to others. It doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be addressed, but we need to be able to build capacity sometimes in those that are around that individual so that the rest of the group can keep moving forward. But again, I think that by knowing, I kind of talk about like origin stories, by knowing people's story and where they come from, it allows us to maybe figure out where they've been burned before. Maybe it was a different leader. And I always say, you as a leader, you may not have caused the dysfunction, especially when you're hired there, but it's your responsibility to heal it, right? And that's from my parents who are psychiatrists, therapists, and all that. And so maybe I bring that too, is like, you're hired into a system. It's now your system. It's now you got to figure out. But again, I think every person who's experiencing burnout, educator or employee, has that comeback story left to be written, but it's going to take a little bit of time and healing, and they need to see that you're truly vested with them and in others. And sometimes that means that you work on others and they are watching and observing. Are you genuine? Are you going to use something against them? Or can I be trusted to be like, I'm vulnerable? But again, I think it's not just behooving to the instructional leader or the principal, administrator, leader, manager, but it's also how can you get the other peers to help that person move forward?
What kind of was ringing for me when you used the knowing their story. That really is a starting point here, isn't it?
Absolutely. Everyone's got a story, and we're in the people business. It's relational. So you got to train and develop them and see them as unique humans who have perhaps some history that needs to be uncovered, or, they may have some brilliance that they just need to be able to hear that resounding yes in order to find their way back to why they came into a service profession or whatever other organizational purpose and intent that they have.
So I'm wondering, people who read your book and they decide they want to take a stab at working with cultural mapping, you got thoughts or suggestions as a starting point for them?
This is not a total how-to book, but there's a how-to book within this book, right? So there's a few chapters in there that it's really about being intentional about those spheres of influence, the leading oneself, leading others, leading teams, leading organizations. And in the middle, how do I lead it? I lead through cultural mapping. At some point in time, if I'm going to move beyond one-on-one conversations and do it systemically, you need to create a map. And so there's a few chapters in there that really talk about how to create a cultural map, and some work that you can do within that to reflect, as well as then plan and take steps necessary to move beyond that. So like Bobby talked about, real examples I've used, whether it's whiteboard, chart paper, or napkin, I think he said, to me, writing, and it gives you kind of some symbols and a little key to be able to start plotting out who's who, where are they, do they have formal influence, do they have informal influence, both, or not sure who influences whom, where is that a strong connection, a moderate connection, where are they at based upon the look fors, and it gives you out, bulleted look fors of commitment that you could use to, as well as stories to try to help you trigger, oh yeah, I see this in this person. And so that can really, I think, be helpful. To me, it's a repeatable event, ideally maybe once every 6 months, beginning of the year, end of the year, going into next year, and just seeing where the growth is. But we always have new people every year too. So then what do you do with it? To me, that's part of the reflection, is you look for where are the groups, like Bobby talked about. It might be people that go out for margaritas and chips on Fridays after work, or it might be, hey, there's another group of closely connected individuals. Okay, so who in there can be an influencer and someone that's positive that we can build upon? Where's my entry points? And I really see the belief that not only people that are committed, they need to have that intentional investment of your time and energy as a leader or an instructional coach, right? But then who's that next up person? Who's that other person that you can build a little bit of capacity with, that now you may have two people and they can ping off of that. And then that really creates that. And there's science behind that in terms of threshold adoption for some people at various different levels. But again, you want to get another person there, another person there. And then all of a sudden, just like diffusion of innovation, you get that triggering effect where a cascade occurs, where then others just start adopting it more rapidly because enough of their teammates, colleagues, they're seeing it, and now it's like, all right, I'm willing, or I have enough support around, and I've seen proof that I'm willing to move forward with it. So that's where I would simply start. We also are obviously available to reach out and be able to talk through, and we do this in person, as well as can reach out to us and figure out different ways to help you figure out where you want to move forward.
What's the best way for listeners to be able to follow up with you with questions and find out more?
We're both on social media, so we have that out there, and I'm Dr._Ben_Johnson because I'm cursed with a common name. But look me up on LinkedIn. I'm here in Bismarck Public Schools, so I have that as a distinguishing there as my real-time job, but then I'm sure you can find Bobby and I through those, and Bobby can share that out. I also have a website that's up and running, but will be continued to be built out, and that's cascadingsolutions.org. So there's opportunities there.
Yeah, with me, Steve, it's at Bobby _2_ Dodd on Instagram and Facebook, and then I'm also on LinkedIn as well. And as Ben said, the website is coming together, and so multiple ways to get in touch with us about this.
Well, we'll stick that in the lead into the podcast. I appreciate the time, guys. You got me thinking, and you reinforced a lot of things for me. And I'll be sending people that I'm working with to be taking a closer look at the book and being more conscious in their leadership work.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, we always kind of say, and at the end of the book, we say, you get the culture you build, not the one that you merely wish for, right? And so we hope that
Right on.
engaging in this cultural mapping and the intentional reflection about your spheres of influence can have clear steps to moving forward, to getting to have that blueprint where you can create that organization where that commitment's thriving, whether you're in a school, a business, or nonprofit. If you can intentionally harness those cascades of cultural influence, you can refine that joy in leadership and move forward whatever work is necessary in your world. And we appreciate your willingness to have us on today.
Well, thanks, because I'm what I just caught there is not only joy for the leader, but joy for the folks you're leading.
Absolutely.
That's really a big payoff. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barkley, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barkleypd.com.